Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Today, the Narendra Modi government has completed 100 days in office. Whether for reasons that are good or otherwise, it's been a fairly momentous 3 months. To most people's surprise, foreign policy has emerged as the government's key forte. But there are others who are disappointed by the lack of enthusiasm for far-reaching structural reforms. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister himself has clearly impressed the nation. From his oratory to his sartorial style, he's caught widespread attention. So today, in a special episode of To The Point, we look back on the first 100 days of the Modi government and ask, what judgment, if any, can we come to? And joining me now to discuss and assess the first 100 days is the editorial advisor of the India Today group, Shekhar Gupta, one of the country's foremost sociologists, Dipankar Gupta, author and Times of India columnist Gurcharan Das, the president of FICCI, Siddharth Birla, the well-known Bollywood actor Kabir Bedi, and hopefully joining us soon, Magsaysay Award winner and former police chief Kiran Bedi. Shekhar Gupta, let's start with the Prime Minister himself, and then after that come to his government and its performance. Are you surprised at the sure-footed and confident start he's made, particularly when you bear in mind that he actually has no experience of handling central government or national affairs?
Well, I'm not surprised because that was his hallmark in any case. He was sure-footed, he was confident, and you expected him to bring that style to Delhi. I think the interesting thing is how quickly he has figured out the ways of Delhi. And the ways of Delhi include the fact that early on in a government's tenure, there's nothing better than a busy foreign policy season. Because most summits get positive coverage. Most foreign policy initiatives, particularly if they are with countries with whom you don't have any contentious problems, are always good news stories. Your leader looks good, and he's also the ability to create sort of good drama around visits, much like Jawaharlal Nehru would dress into tribal clothing or dance with people. He's done some of that. He's played the drums, the flute, stuff like that.
All right, I'll take up, in fact, in a moment's time, Kabir Bedi, the incredible forte and success the Prime Minister has shown in foreign policy. But for a moment, I want to stick to the Prime Minister and his personality. There are three things that I think have caught widespread attention. First, it's his sartorial style. The New York Times says, and I'm quoting, he is a leader who is what he wears. Would you accept that the Modi style is striking, colourful, and for many, even aspirational?
Well, it's certainly a colourful style, and I think he carries it off with great aplomb. I feel that his style is more a statement of a new way of doing things and not just his personal sense of dressing. Because his coming has been such a breath of fresh air from that kind of staid, inept, corrupt, non-moving kind of government to a leader who's decisive, who acts, who speaks out. I mean, his speech from the ramparts of the Red Fort on Independence Day was the best Independence Day speech I've certainly seen from any Prime Minister. And he just speaks of a whole new style, a whole new way of doing things, which is refreshing and it's inspiring. That's, in a word, what I think of his whole dress style being symbolic of.
Dipankar Gupta, when we're talking of the Prime Minister's style, how important in your eyes is the power of his oratory? And would you say that the extempore speech delivered from the ramparts of the Red Fort was in fact, for the Prime Minister, one of the personal high points of the last 100 days?
Well, yes, certainly his speech, the extempore speech he delivered at Red Fort was quite a performance, no doubt about it. And many of those who were critical of Modi couldn't but help admire his speech, especially because he brought in such down-to-earth things like cleanliness and how you treat women and the family and things like that. Alongside with it, of course, he brought in some big issues like Jan Dhan Yojana and Gram Yojana and stuff like that, and bullet trains and I don't know, all these other big things. But his style was what people found endearing. He was reaching out in extempore fashion as if he were, looking at people in the eye and saying what he really feels from his heart. How much of it is, histrionics, how much of it is real, that's a different matter. But the fact is that this is the way he came through to most people.
Mr. Birla, another element of the Prime Minister's personality and style and its influence on our politics is his almost total control of his ministers as well as the bureaucracy that comes under them. Now, I know that the opposition derides that as a one-man operation, but would you accept that we have in the Prime Minister a man who's taken direct control of his government in a way in which preceding Prime Ministers for the last 20, 30 years simply hadn't done?
Karan, I think, leadership is probably the more correct word than control. Now, leadership does tend to exert control. There's no two ways about that. But that control has to be productive and positive. And I think that is the kind of tone that he's trying to set. Yes, there will be some waves up and down. People will take time to get used to it. But I think certainly within his party, he has the discipline. And they follow him absolutely like a disciplined cadre. And I think this discipline will seep down. And soon, I think, rather than use the word control as a discussion point, we'll be talking leadership.
You know, it's very interesting, and clearly Mr. Birla is a diplomat because he's made a distinction between control and leadership. And
Mr. Birla is a good Indian businessman.
well, that may be slightly hitting below the belt when you say it.
No, not below the belt. I'm making a statement of fact.
But sticking to my term control, would you say that in fact the appointment of Amit Shah as BJP president, the effective sidelining of L.K. Advani and Murli Manohar Joshi also suggests that Mr. Modi has restructured the party in his image, and today the BJP is, to use that convenient form, a modified party?
Yes, I mean that would be correct. That would be correct. In fact, the RSS is worried when they are going to get modified and sidelined. However, you know, the most interesting thing that I have seen, we talked about control and his leadership style, is how a sense of purpose is imbuing the bureaucracy in Delhi. That is, to me, the most amazing thing I see again and again.
And does the credit go to Mr. Modi?
Yes, absolutely. I think he has set the tone whereby I've never seen an upbeat bureaucracy in Delhi the way I've seen it now. And I could give you many, many examples.
Kiran Bedi, to sum up this particular part of our discussion, do you accept the BJP description of Narendra Modi as perhaps the most significant Prime Minister India has had, possibly after Indira Gandhi? Or do you think that that is a somewhat over-exaggerated description?
No, it's not exaggerated. I think it's just perfect. I'll give you an example from where Mr. Gurcharan Das has left. There are certain colonies which houses all these civil servants. Earlier the cars were there parked till 10:30 in the morning or 11. Today all the cars are out by 8:15. It's just clear. What is this magic? To tame this senior bureaucracy was no ordinary thing, and only Mr. Narendra Modi could do it. And I'm so glad. That's the foundation of all your infrastructure, policies, plannings, implementation, integrity, etc. So he has set the foundation right.
All right, Masudini made the trains run on time. You're saying that Narendra Modi makes civil servants come to office on time. Let's come now to that point that you were making, because I think it's a very important one. His most surprising success, people say, when you look at the performance of his government, is actually foreign policy. And yet that's something, apart from a few visits that he paid as chief minister, that he has no experience of doing. Are you a little taken aback by the way in which it's become his forte?
Not at all. Because, he is a master of the set piece, and he's making the best use of that, just as he did on Independence Day. But having said that, the foreign policy engagement so far has been mostly in non-contentious areas. I thought the most significant thing he's done on foreign policy was inviting the other South Asian leaders for his swearing in. The rest is more form than substance. Yes, there's a very aggressive opening to Japan, which is significant. But the test of foreign policy will come once you start dealing with Pakistan, China, frankly, even the US, but Pakistan and China, Bangladesh. India's diplomatic challenges and opportunities are today all in the neighborhood.
Okay. Let's pick up, Mr. Birla, on that point that you heard from Shekhar Gupta, that so far, in fact, there's a real possibility that this very successful trip to Japan that's just ended this morning may be more form than substance. There's no doubt that Mr. Modi got red carpet treatment, and there's no doubt that he charmed his Japanese host. But do you believe that, in fact, all of us are victims of television hype? Or do you, from your standpoint as an industrialist, think that actually there is a lot of substance as well?
I think there's much more to it than just the television hype. Let's look at the stage we are at, and which is 3 months of the new government, and many policy and new reforms yet to come. I think the Prime Minister is also interested in showing that he will deliver what he promises, and use that as a stepping stone to the future. And he's engaged Japan not only on a social level, a people-to-people level. Look at the breadth of engagement, in the sense that let's put the dollars and cents on one side, but for the Prime Minister Abe to say that we would like to see the number of Japanese companies in India double. Now that itself talks of a scale of expansion, which is a breadth of expansion, not necessarily the dollars. So I think it's been a good trip. I wouldn't call it hyped. It had very soft moments to it. It had very...
Your answer is predicated on the assumption that that talk of 3.5 trillion yen or $35 billion will actually become a reality, and become a reality soon. Do you really believe it will happen that quickly? Literally in 5 years?
See, number one, from a capacity of spending and from a capacity of absorbing, I don't think those kind of numbers have a problem. Where the problem lies, which I think is being attended to and which was covered in his commitment of the government to provide a conducive atmosphere, an atmosphere of trust, policy-driven decisions, forget about the Japanese desk, but these are signals to any investor.
Okay.
So I think if the government has every intention of delivering on these areas, the numbers we are talking of can become a reality.
Okay.
Because they are very insignificant in the total scheme of things. So I think they need to deliver on the policy areas, and we will get this investment.
Kabir Bedi, many would say that, and Shekhar Gupta said that a moment ago, that Mr. Modi's real challenges are not Japan, but the countries in our immediate neighborhood. Now, when he turned his swearing in into a SAARC summit with Nawaz Sharif as the highlight, and then proceeded to exchange warm letters, gifts for their respective mothers, people genuinely thought that he was starting a new approach to Pakistan. But then abruptly and suddenly it just collapsed. Were you disappointed when the Foreign Secretary talks were called off and the whole atmosphere and euphoria collapsed into virtually nothing?
Well, I was disappointed but not surprised, because essentially the nature of Indo-Pakistan relations is this constant seesaw, which is not always based on foreign policy needs and attitudes, but also dependent on domestic policy in Pakistan, dependent on domestic considerations in India. Pakistan, in a sense, is a story that will go on. But what Modi demonstrated in his foreign policy forays, starting with gathering the SAARC leaders, was affirming the old principle that you gather your friends first into a proper alliance before you confront your enemies or deal with people who are inimical to your interests. I think he's done that with remarkable success in his visit to Nepal, Bhutan, now Japan, what he did at the BRICS summit, earning India the presidency of the BRICS Bank. The steps he's taken are something which display a degree of statesmanship which is quite extraordinary.
Okay.
And Pakistan is not going to be a problem that is solved overnight. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if India and Pakistan merely accepted the international border because it can't be changed, that would be the end of the dispute. There is a vested interest in Pakistan not to let that happen. And that is the root of the problem.
Dipankar Gupta, for many, I suppose the key question when you look at the way Mr. Modi has handled Pakistan is whether he was right or wrong in calling off foreign secretary level talks, because the Pakistani High Commissioner had done what Pakistani leaders have been doing anyway for 20 years, which is talk to Hurriyat. On that specific issue, what's your answer?
Well, I don't really know. I think that because it has been past practice for several decades, doesn't quite make it right. I can't understand why we allowed this to happen for so many years. And this is, of course, not taking away anything from the fact that we should have talks with Pakistan. War is hardly an option, and we must have good neighborly relations. Perhaps track 2 is also a good idea. But to allow the Hurriyat to just walk in and out in the way it did, it doesn't sound right to me. I know many of my friends and people I admire think differently, but I somehow can't get this thought out of my head that to make Pakistan look at us with some kind of surprised respect is very, very necessary. And I would say the same thing for China too, and that's what he has done perhaps in Japan.
The other challenge is handling America. And many of us thought that because he'd been refused a visa, because he'd been snubbed, some say even ostracized, Mr. Modi would have a certain resentment towards Washington. But he's put that behind him almost from day one. Instead, he's won the distinction of an invitation to the White House when he's only going to be at the UN. And were it not for scheduling, he would have ended up also addressing Congress. Would you say that the handling of America, the maturity with which he's put past slights behind him, actually is a feather in his cap? Or am I exaggerating?
No, I think it is. It is. It shows real leadership. And it shows, frankly, I didn't expect that kind of generosity. But what's important here is the ability to separate a personal thing with a national interest. And someone who puts something, expresses national interest, that person gives a huge reassurance to the rest of the country.
How easy is it to separate a personal slight from national interest?
Well, it's not easy. We are all human beings, after all. And it is to his credit. I mean, I was surprised, frankly.
Kiran Bedi, in the last 100 days, we've had the French Foreign Minister, the British Foreign Minister, the American Secretary of State, the British Defense Secretary, the Chinese Foreign Minister. Is that simply because India now has a majority government and there's renewed interest because there's investment possibilities? Or is that also a tribute to Mr. Modi, the man who heads the government?
It's a tribute to Mr. Modi, but India was a static giant. India is a very big giant. It's a market of 1.2 plus billion people, and also educated, English speaking, intelligent, entrepreneurial. The world needs India today. World understands, and now and they know this. They're moving forward with dynamic leadership, who's building trust, who's building accountability, who's building implementation. So India is now being looked up to. The world needs India. While the world is aging, India is getting younger.
Okay.
World needs India. And Mr. Modi is preparing India to provide for the whole world today. It's upskilling, his skills upgradation program is nothing but skills for the world.
Okay.
Because we would be providers.
Shekhar Gupta, let's come to the economy, because clearly that's where 99.9% of Mr. Modi's constituents in this country actually expect him to take action, and where they were looking for immediate results. Now, many people had hoped for dramatic transformation. What we've got instead is faster decision making, better implementation, a more cooperative bureaucracy. And I suppose all of that adds up to good governance. But is good governance sufficient to get us back to 8% growth?
I think you get good governance for 2 years, you will have 8% growth in the third year. Look, nobody can do anything by magic, because wheels of the economy in a large country, a large economy like ours, take time moving. But once they start to move, then they can gather momentum. So I entirely agree. There's been much quicker decision making. There's been much greater sense of purpose. I would have liked to see a more positive budget with more sort of more positive statements and a few more things. But you can always ask for more. I think overall, look, we came from a situation where for nearly 3.5 to 4 years, we had no governance in the country. We were in suspended animation. So what you see right now looks like we're bringing out at least into a canter, if not in a sprint. And I think it's a very good thing.
Let me put an opposite sort of question to you, Siddharth Birla. There are three major changes that many in the country, industrialists in particular, were waiting for and hoping for: the reversal of retrospective taxation, labor law reforms, and a change in the land acquisition laws. At the moment, except at the margins, no one's talking about labor law reform. Retrospective taxation hasn't been reversed, but we've been promised there won't be more of it. And frankly, when it comes to land acquisition, the government is not going to amend those laws. They'll simply add to the list of exemptions. And if you want to add to that GST, despite the bright face the finance minister puts on it, his budget pointedly did not have a deadline for starting GST. So when you add all of that up together, is it satisfactory or disappointing?
I would not call it disappointing. I think you've identified 4 of the real key issues. I think action has begun on all of them. We need to see how it all pans out. From what we see, that the intentions are there to resolve these issues, particularly the retrospective taxation, which completely dampened investment sentiment. GST, introduction of GST, and as FICCI we would have hoped that GST can be implemented in calendar 2015. And if we read the signals in the sense that the finance minister is putting out, it seems doable. It seems doable, and I think it's going to be a very important signal. Coming to the Land Act, I think the kind of cooperation that the center can generate with the states is going to be of critical importance, and I think GST is the first test case.
Okay.
And I think it's been prudent that they've stepped into GST first rather than try to tamper with the Land Act, which is also equally important. But I have a feeling that once this cooperation between center and state starts moving forward, we'll see very quick improvements on the Land Act, on the land acquisition side. On the labor laws, I think they've made a gentle beginning, and I think they're doing what is politically expedient. So I would look forward to good action on that front too.
Let me sum up that question and put it like this. Instead of big, bang, bold reform, we have a lot of little measures, a little tinkering here, a little incremental addition there. Does the government lack the boldness of its earlier rhetoric when it comes to implementation?
No, I think quite the contrary. I think these what seem like little things actually are quite amazing, what's happening very quietly. And I refer you to what is something called the Project Monitoring Group in the Cabinet Secretariat, which is working on 4,60,000 crores worth of projects, and how at breakneck speed they are not only monitoring them, but they are debottlenecking them. Now, it's not
Can I interrupt? This is very interesting what you're saying, because when you joined me on the day of the budget, you actually were disappointed. You thought an opportunity had been missed. In 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks, you've actually changed your position.
Yes, I have, because I've gone and looked at something very visionary that is going on. And that is, under the direction of Narendra Modi, they are actually taking 60 laws, 60 clearances to start an industry and putting them all online as one under one portal, whereby for the first time we have, in the 9 months they've been given this, we are going to have a single window for the first time.
And this is the point at which good governance becomes revolutionary reform.
Yes.
Let me, Mrs. Bedi, put something else to you. One of the measures that struck my attention when the Prime Minister was in Japan was the announcement that he was going to set up a special management team in his Prime Ministerial office with Japanese representation to ensure that the 3.5 trillion offered from Japan was effectively implemented, that there were no obstacles and hurdles. And you know the Indian system can manufacture obstacles out of thin air. Do you think Mr. Modi needs to do the same thing if the investment we need in defense, insurance, railways and infrastructure from all over the world is to actually materialize? That he needs to replicate that special management team for Japan for every other country as well from where we want money?
Current SMT, Special Management Team, is a very good international practice. I was part of this team myself when I was working in the United Nations. So SMT is a tested, coordinating, synergizing clearance house. I cannot imagine Mr. Modi putting in all his energy without synergy. So SMT will stand for synergy and expeditious clearance, and the kind of impatience, patience which Mr. Modi is showing, he needs SMT, not only for Japan, but as he moves on. So you will see this synergy coming in. He's already synergized heads of secretaries when he tells them stop litigating against each other. What is he saying? He is exactly doing that. He's in fact made SMT even of the senior secretaries of Government of India. He now needs to take it to the state and grassroots level. I think that's the real challenge. How does he take SMT down the line?
Dipankar Gupta, something that happened literally just about a week ago was the launch with enormous aplomb of the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana. Now, do you accept the government's rhetoric that this will remove and eliminate financial untouchability and also importantly remove and eliminate poverty? Or do you think this is just a first step and a lot depends on what follows, and the follow-up is really the critical point?
Well, you see, who can argue against Jan Dhan Yojana? So it's a very good idea. People should have bank accounts, and the first day itself, there were more than almost 2 crore people who opened bank accounts. The taste of the pudding, as they say, is eating. What are you going to do with those bank accounts? A. B. The other thing is that are there services available for people to actually access and utilize their bank account profitably? Will they be able to draw overdrafts? And finally, what is the point of having a bank account if there's very little money that can be put in the bank?
True.
Unless, of course, you're now saying that all the benefits will be transferred to the bank directly, which would be a good idea. But if that is all there is to it, then I don't think it really measures up to much. But at any rate, there's no doubt at all that opening bank accounts is a very good idea. It should be done.
When
But bank account, Jan Dhan Yojana and Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana, they're the kind of UPA touch about them, very touchy-feely, but they don't really give you clear indications of success and failure, like for instance cities of bullet trains or Clean Ganga do.
Okay.
And I think that these are the 2 areas where the NDA is probably on a very weak wicket.
You know, when we discussed the Jan Dhan Yojana, you were with me, and you pointed out that it would not succeed unless DBT benefits were directly funneled through this. It would not succeed unless NREGA in particular went through it, and very soon LPG money as well. And you wondered whether the government had the capacity to do that effectively, or whether those follow-up actions would be where the Jan Dhan Yojana would fall flat. Right. Have you changed your mind on that?
Well, I think that it's going to take a couple of years before these benefits flow through. And once they start flowing through, then the banks will take an interest in this. Right now, the banks don't have an interest.
So the jury's out on this one.
But what I would urge the RBI to do is to do what Kenya did, which is to allow mobile banking.
But let's not get into that, because
And
we
they're
had that
about-
debate
they're
when you
near
were
it.
with me last time, and as was made clear, in fact, on that occasion by Arvind Virmani, that is not something that is permitted by the RBI at the moment. You're asking them to change, but it's not permitted. Let's not get into that fight, because that's a fight we had earlier. Let's not repeat old history just for you're on air.